It is 7 o'clock. Good to see you this morning. A last resort. The words of a Prime Minister desperate to avoid another lockdown in England. And today he will reveal his plans to try to do just that whilst keeping COVID at bay over the winter. We'll be bringing you the first details of the plan just starting to emerge. And I'll speak to the Vaccines Minister Nadhim Zahawi shortly. Plus, jabs for 12-year-olds get the green light, but there are some concerns over consent and exactly how it will be decided if a child can overrule a parent who isn't in favour. Also on the show...
Hey, stop hitting the dog! Hold him! Yeah, he's got me. Stop hitting the dog!
Could this be the bravest dog in the world? Police dog Stark took down a suspected criminal before being hit 20 times with a machete. Buddy Hanger. We'll be meeting him at around about 8:30. And we will be speaking to a man you may well be familiar with. He's just completed the coldest swim on Earth. Lewis Pugh is his name, and he'll be joining us at 9:30. It is Tuesday, the 14th of September. Winter warmer. The Prime Minister is expected to reveal a bonfire of some COVID restrictions alongside booster jabs for all over 50s. But this warning from one top doctor.
What's clear is that the vaccination programme on its own is not showing itself to be sufficient.
And I'll be here live in Downing Street, where that COVID winter plan will be on the agenda for Cabinet, which Boris Johnson will be holding shortly.
12 to 15-year-olds will be offered COVID jabs in England, but there are concerns over consent. Here's what the Health Secretary told this programme just last week.
As long as we believe that the child is competent enough to make this decision, then the child's will prevail.
Baseless, unviable and potentially unlawful. Prince Andrew's lawyer hits out over claims of sexual assault against the Duke of York. Our climate change correspondent reports from the rainforest in Gabon, as a new warning suggests that millions could die in extreme temperatures if world leaders can't agree over greenhouse gases.
Gabon is one of the few countries on Earth that absorbs more carbon than it emits. It's why this whole region is crucial to the battle against climate change and why what happens here will matter far beyond national borders.
Spyware alert. Apple issues an emergency software update after devices became vulnerable to attack without the user even having to click on anything. Game, set and match made in heaven as Emma Raducanu joins a star-studded cast of celebs dressed to impress at New York's Met Gala. Morning all. Today, the Prime Minister will reveal his plans to fight COVID over winter at the same time as relaxing as many restrictions as possible. He says future lockdowns will be a last resort, but some powers will remain up his sleeve. A plan to offer booster jabs to all over 50s is expected to take centre stage after the news that jabs for 12 to 15-year-olds have had the green light. The chair of the British Medical Association has told us, though, that vaccines alone just aren't enough. The PM is also expected to relax some other restrictions, such as scrapping or simplifying some of the travel measures that may well also be announced. The Vaccines Minister will be on the show shortly. But first, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, has this report.
Boris Johnson is getting ready for winter and a possible new wave of COVID. His plan, booster jabs for over 50s and flu vaccinations. He'll say further lockdowns in England are a last resort. And in an expanding vaccine programme, the PM believes he has the tool he needs. But he's warning the pandemic is far from over. But thanks to our phenomenal vaccine programme, new treatments and testing, we're able to live with the virus without significant restrictions on our freedoms. Government scientists are nervous, however, claiming the COVID risk remains real.
Anybody who believes that the big risk of COVID is now it's all in the past and actually it's too late to be making a difference has not understood where we're going to head as we go into autumn and winter, where there will continue to be challenges, there will continue to be pressure on the NHS.
The booster scheme, due to start later this month, will mean a third vaccine dose for millions of older people to slow winter infections, with over 80s and vulnerable people first, followed by all over 50s by Christmas. But with case numbers climbing, doctors are calling for more than just jabs.
What's clear is that the vaccination programme on its own is not showing itself to be sufficient, because in spite of vaccinating more and more of the population, we're still seeing significant increases in people becoming seriously ill and admitted to hospital, many on ventilators and many more dying.
The Prime Minister, however, says the UK must learn to live with the virus, and he's scrapping some emergency COVID rules introduced last year.
But some powers are being kept in reserve. Measures such as the compulsory wearing of face masks and mandatory vaccination passports. That is likely to provoke an angry backlash from many Conservative MPs.
The PM may be adamant that he won't impose another lockdown in England, but he won't rule it out either. John Craig, Sky News.
And we are joined once again on the programme by the Vaccines Minister, Nadhim Zahawi. Mr Zahawi, really good to see you this morning. And it does feel, having dipped my toe into social media this morning, seen some concern, seen plenty of misinformation, it feels like we all need to take a few deep breaths this morning, because we are talking about vaccinating children. Can you just repeat the justification that was given to the public yesterday by the Chief Medical Officer? Why do we feel it is necessary for 12 to 15-year-olds to receive a vaccine?
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, Neil. So the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, who have relied upon and have delivered throughout the vaccine deployment programme, I've been on your show many times, beginning back last year when we launched with the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine on the 8th of December. The JCVI looked at the clinical impact on 12 to 15-year-olds and came down on the side that actually being vaccinated is marginally better, but not enough to recommend a universal vaccination programme. They recommended that the chief medical officers of England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland look at the other public health and mental health impacts on children, not on the wider population, on those 12 to 15-year-olds. They reported yesterday, and they've unanimously, all four chief medical officers, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, have recommended that we offer a one dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine to 12 to 15-year-olds. Now, the way we will do that is, and we've accepted that advice, is through the school-age immunisation service, which has been doing vaccination of children for many, many years, very well versed in doing this. So clinicians will lead on this in schools. Schools will contact parents in the usual way that they do and will require consent, parental consent. Of course, this is voluntary. There is no stigmatization of any parent or anyone who may choose not to have the vaccine. Although I have to say, when we offered the vaccine last month to 16 and 17-year-olds, they came forward in the past month in their droves and their numbers, because they realize how important it is to protect themselves. And of course, they've seen firsthand the damage that the COVID pandemic has done to mental health and, of course, to schools as well.
But just to go back to the rationale for this, part of the concern, as I understand it, from parents who've expressed concern, is that we have, in essence, clinical advice being given for non-clinical purposes. We have doctors advising 12 to 15-year-olds to follow a medical process, a vaccination, for reasons which don't seem to have a grounding in the clinical side. And that's worrying people.
And that's really important to sort of try and flesh out for your viewers. The chief medical officers were asked, the JCVI, the Joint Committee, actually recommended that we ask the chief medical officers. We asked them. They also consulted with the Royal Colleges of Paediatrics, the Royal College of GPs, and of course the JCVI were in the room to look at the mental health impact on those 12 to 15-year-olds, the public health impact on the 12 to 15-year-olds, not on the greater sort of good of society. It's actually for those 12 to 15-year-olds. The JCVI were only sort of looking at what they are narrowly qualified to look at, which is why they made the recommendation that we should also asked the chief medical officers. They have now come back to us and they recommend the offer of a single dose for 12 to 15-year-olds with parental consent. So that is what we'll be going ahead and doing. It's been a very thorough
Just on the consent point, sorry. Just on the consent point, Minister, we've really got a finite amount of time this morning. I'm really keen to kind of get through as many questions as possible. But on the consent point, how will that be administered? Again, of course, a bit of disinformation on social media this morning. I mean, isn't it the case that 12 to 15-year-olds can, right now, consent to other forms of medical treatment where their parents perhaps have a different view?
So the consent process, the school-age immunisation service, are really well equipped to do this. They've been doing it for years for children's vaccination in schools. So children will have a leaflet that they can share with their parents, and of course will have a consent form that will go to them either electronically or in some schools physically to their parents, and the parents will then read all the information, have to give consent if the child is to be vaccinated. On the very rare occasions where there is a difference of opinion between the parent and the 12 to 15-year-old, where the parent, for example, doesn't want to give consent, but the 12 to 15-year-old wants to have the vaccine, then the first step is the clinician of the school immunization service will bring the parent and the 12 to 15-year-old, the child, together to see whether they can reach consent. If that is not possible, then if the child is deemed to be competent, and this has been around since the 80s for all vaccination programs, for example, in schools, if the child is deemed to be competent, the Gillick competence, as it's referred to, then the child can have the vaccine. But these are very rare occasions, and it is very important to remember that the school age immunization service is incredibly well equipped to deal with this. Clinicians are very well versed in delivering vaccinations to 12 to 15-year-olds in schools.
Sure. Let's talk, though, about the winter plan. And this was something we explored with your colleague, Therese Coffey, yesterday. It is absolutely fair to say, isn't it, that despite the clear inclination to avoid lockdowns, to avoid reintroduction of mandatory face masks, social distancing and so on, clearly you don't want to do it. But those options remain in the arsenal, don't they?
So the non-pharmaceutical interventions, the NPIs, the dreaded NPIs, were our only weapon against the virus before the vaccines came along. The vaccines now are sort of the prime way we have been able to manage this virus, and will continue to be, as the Prime Minister will set out later today, as will the Secretary of State make a statement to Parliament. They will
Sure. But let's, again, we're really pushed for time. Lockdown remains an option, doesn't it? Social distancing, mask wearing, it all remains an option. It's just because the Prime Minister will be saying, the pandemic is far from over, but, we are able to live with the virus without significant restrictions on our freedoms. I'm just wondering where the tipping point is that would lead to, for example, lockdown being brought back in and so on.
So lockdowns would be an absolutely last resort. What we're trying to do at the moment, Neil, is to transition this virus from pandemic to endemic through a massive vaccination program. We know the vaccines have saved over 112,000 lives, 24 million infections. We're about to embark on a massive booster campaign and, of course, a flu vaccination program, because I am concerned about flu. We haven't had much flu circulating anywhere in the world. And in a bad year, we could lose up to 25,000 people to flu. So the combination of the booster campaign for COVID, which the Prime Minister will say more about today, as will the Secretary of State, in terms of the JCVI final advice, which we have now received and have accepted. The interim advice, which they gave us on the 30th of June, helped us to plan. So planning has been well underway to be able to, I hope, come back on your programme and break the record that we set in the first vaccination programme, because we have a massive task ahead to effectively protect the most vulnerable with a third booster shot, as well as, of course, we're already doing the immunosuppressed as part of their primary vaccine treatment.
Sure. I'm sorry, Minister, but the reason I push on this is at times this week it does feel like the messaging from government has been in different places. At the weekend, you know, that's an end. No vaccine passports. The following day, we find out that they remain on the table, telling the Prime Minister incredibly optimistic, but at the same time suggesting that there are circumstances in which, as you've just conceded, we could go back into lockdown. I mean, it's a little bit early in the year to be asking these kind of questions. I will concede. But you can't, for example, guarantee right now that we'll all be able to spend Christmas with our families, can you?
So, look, the important thing to remember is as we embark on the winter months, the virus have an inbuilt advantage, whether it be flu or the COVID virus. As Chris Whitty set out yesterday, it would be foolhardy to suggest that this thing's already transitioned from pandemic to endemic. That is the direction that we're taking. A massive booster campaign, a really fit-for-purpose variant surveillance system, a really fit-for-purpose test and trace system. That is where we think we will be able to end up. We're confident that we have the infrastructure in place to deliver on this. But of course, look, we have to have contingency planning. There is, all the time, more information coming in on how the virus is behaving. Winter gives the virus an inbuilt advantage. Boosters reduce that advantage by, hopefully taking the most vulnerable out of the harm's way of the virus.
I understand all that. I understand all that, Minister. I'm really not looking for some kind of gotcha moment here. All that I'm trying to kind of flesh out is the idea that we are not out of the woods in terms of COVID. Even if things go as well as you expect, there remains the possibility, however likely or unlikely, that we could see ourselves returning to, public health responses, the likes of which we have seen, in the recent past.
So again, I just repeat for your viewers, the non-pharmaceutical interventions, the lockdowns, were our only tool. That is no longer true. That we have the vaccines, we have the test and trace system, we have the surveillance, the variant surveillance system, we have the public health advice, which people followed of all ages, really, really diligently, which has allowed us to take a step forward, to reopen our economy. And the booster campaign with flu will help basically protect the most vulnerable as we transition, I hope, this virus. And I can come back on your program and say to you, after winter's over, hand on heart, we are one of the leading major economies of the world to demonstrate how you transition the virus from pandemic to endemic and then deal with it on an annual basis through the inoculation, the vaccination program.
We will all be keeping our fingers crossed that is the case. I do wonder, though, what your advice would be to colleagues within your party who are openly expressing scepticism about one key aspect of all of this, the vaccination of 12 to 15-year-olds. Marcus Fish tweeted this: "Sorry to have to say it, but the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, does not deserve the confidence of the country in deciding to vaccinate teenagers without good clinical reason." His words, he, the Chief Medical Officer, should resign. What would you say to Mr. Fish this morning?
Well, all I would say is that both the JCVI, who in their guidance said, look, it is marginally more beneficial to be vaccinated, the 12 to 15, healthy 12 to 15-year-olds. It's well worth reminding your audience that we've been vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds who are more vulnerable, as per the JCVI advice. The JCVI advice also said that we should consult the 4 chief medical officers, and they have unanimously come back. This is not just Chris Whitty. This is all 4 chief medical officers of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland to give us the advice that we should make the vaccine available to 12 to 15-year-olds who are healthy and for their parents to consent. And that is exactly what we will be doing.
A good point on which to conclude. Minister, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, one leading scientist has told Sky News that there is a clear possibility that the NHS could face a serious situation over the winter. Epidemiologist Professor Mark Woolhouse of the University of Edinburgh says 2 sets of figures help to highlight the point. Well, hospital admissions for coronavirus are, as you can see, creeping up, and especially so, excuse me, for the over 85s. The rate of admissions for people aged over 65 has more than doubled over the past 2 months. However, the number of hospitalisations and deaths in the third wave are low relative to the second wave. Case rates, well, they've risen in all 4 countries of the UK since June. and have reached record highs, as you can see, in Scotland. Around about 795 people testing positive in the week to the 8th of September. Now, well, let's take a look at some of the latest COVID data. There were 30,825 new cases of coronavirus reported in the last 24-hour period. A further 61 people have died, taking the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test to 134,261. Almost 15,000 first doses of a COVID vaccine have been given, while more than 52,000 people received their second dose. In total, just over 44 million people are now fully vaccinated. Just a little bit of breaking news to bring you that you are seeing in the bottom of your screen during our interview with the Vaccines Minister. The number of job vacancies in June to August 2021 has risen over 1 million for the first time since records began, and is now 249,000 above its pre-pandemic January to March 2020 level. More on that a little bit later. But still to come on the programme, as we've been discussing, the PM to set out his plans later on how he's going to be keeping COVID out this winter. We'll be speaking with a clinical microbiologist at 7:30. What does Labour make of the government's winter COVID plans? We'll be hearing from the Shadow Economics Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, at 8:05. And at 8:45, we'll be speaking to the 23-year-old who started her own club after finding out that her friends were excluding her from social events. Prince Andrew's lawyer says sexual assault claims against the Duke of York are baseless, unviable and potentially unlawful. He was speaking at a hearing in the United States, as our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills reports.
For 6 years, we've seen this photograph. Now, for the first time, we've heard from both their lawyers. Prince Andrew's legal team telling the judge in New York the abuse allegations are baseless, non-viable and potentially unlawful. Those acting for Virginia Giuffre insisting their case against him has been effectively served after she claimed she was sexually abused by him 3 times.
And I think those are two alternatives.
Lisa Bloom represents some of Jeffrey Epstein's victims and says the judge has a number of ways he could speed up the process.
In many cases where I'm trying to serve a high-profile person, and I do a lot of these cases, the judge will give us an alternative so that people can't just continue to hide behind gates and walls and fly out of the country. And I think those alternatives are available in the UK as well.
A document filed just hours before the telephone court hearing confirmed Prince Andrew's team would be challenging how the papers were served. Andrew Bretler, who's represented Hollywood stars on rape allegations, told the judge they have already referred it to the High Court in London and said their case partly hangs on another private settlement made by Virginia Giuffre that they believe protects the Duke and others from any compensation claims. Lawyer Alan Dershowitz is another of those individuals.
The release was cited in the dismissal of the case against me. It precludes anybody who was covered by the release from being sued by Virginia Giuffre. Virginia got her money. She's gotten over $5 million. She's built a beautiful home. And in exchange for the money that she has received, she signed a release. She's bound by that release.
Giuffre's team, whose private investigator served papers here at the Prince's home in Windsor, have now been given a week to make any more requests or apply to the court to help. It's believed that Prince Andrew is still in Scotland, where the Queen is also spending her summer break. His lawyers planning their next steps, with the clock ticking and a judge now expecting answers. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News in Windsor.
Experts are warning that 10 million people could die every year from extreme weather caused by climate change. A new report by the Chatham House International Affairs Group found that if carbon emissions are not drastically reduced by 2030, severe and life-changing climate impacts will be locked in for future generations. The report's author, Dr. Daniel Quiggin, has said a glimmer of hope still exists and that we could avoid these impacts if world leaders were to take action now.
around about 10 million people or more by the 2030s, unfortunately, are likely to die outside. Now, this is all, incredibly sad and depressing, but just a glimmer of hope does still exist. Obviously, we're running up to COP26 and countries are increasing their pledges, increasing their ambition, but really we need to see on the ground policy action to drive down those emissions commensurate with the targets and more.
And well, just after 7:30, we have a special report from our climate change correspondent, Hannah Thomas-Peter, on the calls for funding in Gabon to protect the forests essential to absorbing carbon emissions. And as we always do, let's take a quick look at the impact of climate change on the planet. At the top line showing how the UK's power is being produced, just 18% from renewables at the moment. The next line shows you how much warmer the Earth is now than back in 1880 when records began. Then the figure to just how long scientists believe it will take to reach the plus 1.5 degrees Celsius figure, seen by many as a point of no return for the planet. And finally, that large statistic at the bottom there, the total amount of CO2 emissions in millions of tonnes. You can keep up to date with all the stories affected by the climate on the Daily Climate Show, right here, live on Sky News, every weekday at 6:30. Now, Apple has issued an emergency software update after a flaw was found, which allows certain spyware to infect some products, including the iPhone and the Mac, without the user having to click on anything. Sky's Jemima Walker joins us to give us a little bit more detail on this. Incredibly worrying that you don't even have to do anything to become infected. Explain a bit more.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why Apple has moved quite quickly to update its software in order to stop this zero-clicks spyware. So normally you'd have to click on a link in an email, for example, but with this specific spyware, you don't need to do that. So the flaw was found by researchers at the University of Toronto's Citizen Lab, and they had previously seen evidence of zero-click spyware, but this is the first time they've been able to capture the code in order to really work out exactly how it works. And they said that they found evidence of it on the phone of an Saudi activist. And they say they've got high confidence that the Israeli security firm NSO Group was behind the attack. NSO haven't confirmed or denied it, but they've just said that they will continue to provide intelligence and law enforcement agencies around the world with life-saving technologies to fight terror and crime.
Jemima, thanks very much indeed. Now, more than 2/3 of travel companies are expected to make redundancies when furlough comes to an end later this month. A survey by ABTA estimates that around 100,000 jobs could be on the line. The group is calling for an overhaul to the government's traffic light system for travel, including an end to the widespread use of PCR COVID tests to help the sector recover. The Prime Minister's mother, Charlotte Johnson-Wall, has died at the age of 79. A portrait painter by trade, she'd suffered from Parkinson's disease since she was in her 40s. She passed away suddenly and peacefully in hospital, according to a family statement shared with the Daily Telegraph. The family of missing British actor Tanya Fear has confirmed that she has been found safely by police. The actress was last seen leaving her apartment in Los Angeles on Thursday, the 9th of September. In a statement on Twitter, Tanya's family say they're relieved and grateful, and they've thanked the police and the public for their help in finding her. Picture story of the day, this one. US Open winner Emma Raducanu spent last night rubbing shoulders with Hollywood royalty at New York's iconic Met Gala. Now, if you've seen them before, it is always a typically flamboyant affair. Now, the 18-year-old, looking very stunning, I have to say, was invited to attend the annual event by Vogue's Anna Wintour after winning Saturday's final in straight sets. Now, despite her, meteoric rise to fame, she certainly doesn't appear to be particularly overawed at the event, dressed in a two-piece black and white off-the-shoulder number that I'm reliably informed is from Chanel. She was joined on the red carpet by the reality TV star Kim Kardashian. Yep, that's her. She made one of the biggest statements at the gala. The makeup mogul, who turned up with her estranged husband Kanye West, was covered head to toe in a black bodysuit with only her hair visible. Why? Also making the headlines for his show-stopping outfit, the rapper and singer-songwriter Lil Nas X. You need to wait for the reveal here. Definition of fashion royalty. But once the cape comes off, he's hiding a golden outfit that looks straight from Star Wars. Yeah, rather you than me, mate. Meanwhile, Grammy winner Billie Eilish, who co-hosted the event, shed those trademark baggy clothes for a huge peach ball gown that she said was inspired by Marilyn Monroe. I think I can see it, actually. And Rihanna, well, she's stolen the show at the Met many times in the past. She turned up late in this all-black jacket this year. Talking about cutting edge, Canadian singer Grimes came swinging a sword down the red carpet, complete with a matching metallic face mask. Oh, and then we had the very definition of a fashion statement. The US politician Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez came supporting a dress demanding that we tax the rich. The medium is the message, she said about the dress. Of course, the perfect place to make that point, the Met Gala, organised by Vogue. Still to come on the programme, exactly where are all the jabs going? I'll have the very latest on what to expect from the government's upcoming winter plan announcement. Today, reveal his plans to fight COVID over winter, at the same time as relaxing as many of the restrictions as possible. The Vaccines Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, told me that lockdowns will only be reintroduced as a last resort. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Kate McCann, who's in Downing Street for us this morning. Of course, Cabinet taking place just a little bit later on. Kate, just take us through that which we learnt from the Vaccines Minister. I mean, pretty clearly, options remain on the table, but they are doing everything within their power to suggest we are on the right trajectory to enjoy, if not an entirely normal winter, then as close to normal as possible.
I certainly think that's the hope from inside government, but today, and certainly that interview with Nadhim Zahawi, was all about a balancing act. I mean, the crucial moment for me was when you asked him about Christmas, something that lots of people care about. People may be starting to think about it. The weather's certainly putting us in that frame of mind. He couldn't guarantee that people would be able to celebrate Christmas. And it was actually the way that he gave that answer, talking about vaccination programmes, boosters being really the big hope that the government thinks will make sure that the NHS won't end up in crisis this winter. But he caveated that. He talked about how there would be the flu infections that would come and scientists really not knowing what the data is going to look like. And that'll be one of the things today worth watching out for in that press conference with the Prime Minister and his top scientific advisors. Those graphs that we're so used to seeing, the trajectories, the explanation of where we might end up, that will be one of the most important parts of the messaging that Boris Johnson is going to hope that he can get right in the next couple of months. It will be that balancing act, though. It will be about boosters, about vaccinations for children. And, of course, you asked about consent, because children, 12 to 15-year-olds, will be able to say they want the vaccine, even if their parents don't want them to. It sounds complicated, but the government is clear that it does have a plan for that, even if it happens rarely.
Kate, many thanks indeed. Well, let's speak now to Ravi Gupta, Professor of Clinical Microbiology at the Cambridge Institute, also a member of NERBTAC, the expert committee advising the government on new and emerging respiratory viruses. Today, though, we should make it absolutely clear, speaking to us in a personal capacity. Professor Gupta, great to have you on the programme this morning. Just got a general question to start with. What would your response be to anyone who suggests that we are out of the woods as regards COVID-19, that, the path to Christmas and a happy time with our families is entirely free of potential danger?
Well, I think we can see from the figures that we're still nearing 1,000 deaths a week and thousands of hospitalised patients who are challenging capacity in our hospitals, and of course making care for non-COVID patients extremely difficult as well because of the stretch of the staff that are in those hospitals who have been under pressure for 18 months now. So it's pretty clear, I think, from the data and from obviously individual sources that we're not out of the woods, and it doesn't bode well for going into winter at all.
And part of the reason for that, of course, is that winter is the time that traditionally respiratory infections, respiratory illnesses really do start to place an increased burden on a health service, which even at the best of times, it seems to be pretty stretched.
That's right. And we should also remember that respiratory diseases also trigger things like heart disease, heart attacks, abnormal rhythms. So these infections are actually responsible for a large number of medical negative outcomes. And so that's why winter is traditionally a very difficult time, because especially vulnerable and elderly people tend to be the first victims of respiratory illness and all the complications that arise from that.
But given all of that, then, does it not seem slightly strange that this is a point at which the Prime Minister is making a merit out of... Well, we've obviously got to wait for his statement this afternoon, but appears to be making a merit out of removing some of the restrictions that have been placed, particularly as regards travel, quarantine and international travellers coming here?
Yes, well, I think that if we cast our minds back to July 19th, many scientists, including myself, were saying that we need to take this slowly because the transmission rates are far too high to be removing all restrictions, and this will have a knock-on effect. In other words, you can't get it, we won't get away with this as a country moving into winter. And what we're seeing now is really the result of that advice not being heeded, and now in a position where we're talking about lockdowns again. So I think that with the correct planning, this could have been avoided, and so it's a difficult position for everyone involved.
Of course, part of the announcement that we've had over the past 24 hours relates to the vaccination of 12 to 15-year-olds. And you don't need to go particularly far on social media to discover there's a degree of concern among some parents about essentially a clinical treatment, a clinical advice being given for what appear to be non-clinical reasons. What's your view on that?
Well, my view is that the degree of death and suffering we are experiencing as a nation is immense, and therefore public health measures aimed through vaccination at individuals is a valid approach to take in curbing transmission. We have to remember that the complications from vaccination are extremely low even in children and in teenagers, no matter what people might hear. And the risk of COVID-19, of course, is still there. The risk of long COVID is still poorly understood, but it is a reality in the young children, and this could have debilitating impacts on them. And the second thing is we need to remember that when people die, then the entire family is affected, including the young children and teenagers. So by doing nothing, we are also putting those children through very difficult times that will have knock-on effects. So I think overall the strategy should be to vaccinate children as quickly as possible to curb transmission in the community.
You mentioned a second ago, Professor, that the data is perhaps not quite there in terms of, we certainly don't fully understand long COVID, but there is some data emerging that raises concerns about children. I mean, is that data set, in your opinion, enough that people should be just, as a matter of course, vaccinating if they are afforded the opportunity to do so?
Yes, that's on a personal level. My children would put my children forward for vaccination on the basis not only of a personal benefit, but of course of the population benefit.
Professor Gupta, good to see you this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. But let's turn our attention now to Kevin Courtney, of course, the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union. Kevin, great to see you again. Let's start, shall we? We spoke with the Vaccines Minister just a little earlier on the programme, and he made it absolutely clear that in terms of administering this vaccination programme, schools, whilst they may well be the location for some of it, educators are not going to be involved in that process, which I'm sure is exactly what you and your members wanted to hear.
Yeah, I mean, schools are very used to being part of this the country's childhood vaccination programme. So we're used to schools being the site for that, and helping out, like volunteers help out at the vaccination centres to a certain degree, making sure the children are there on time, etc. But we're not the medical experts, so it's education staff aren't putting jabs in arms.
Good. But and yet, we have already seen anecdotal reports of schools being contacted by lawyers, head teachers, having messages left on the answer phone. I mean, like it or not, it does feel like teachers are going to be, even without a level of involvement that some had assumed was going to be the case, they will be in the firing line on this.
Yeah, I mean, there are some anti-vaxxers who are very annoyed about this government decision. They've been to our union headquarters protesting about us having anything to do with it at all, and they'll do that around some schools as well. It's really important that we protect schools who are just taking the government decision and doing what they can do with it. This vaccination of children, we're not medically qualified to know whether it's, how can we know whether it's medically the right thing? But if you listen to what the scientists are saying, you've just had Ravi Gupta on, but even if you listen to JCVI, they said there was a net medical benefit. They said it was small, but it was a net benefit. And then the chief medical officers have looked at the impact on education disruption, which has been really large in our country. I think that's because we've got very big class sizes. Very hard to stop the virus spreading. So we've had lots of disruption. If this vaccination can help reduce that disruption, that's a very good thing for our young people. If they're at home, they're not just missing class time, they're also missing time in the playground, they're missing their swimming lessons, they're missing the art. So reducing that disruption is important if we can. And there is still a lot of disruption in schools in Scotland at the moment. We might be heading into that in England as well.
Well, Kevin, what is your understanding of whether or not schools will have the right, or whether they will be compelled to set up a kind of a two-tier system? So there will be some children who are unvaccinated. There will be children who are vaccinated. What would the rules be about going on school trips or class outings of some kind where you have that mixture of vaccinated and unvaccinated?
Well, we aren't anticipating that there will be any such two-tier system between children where parents have decided to vaccinate and children where parents have decided not to vaccinate. We're not anticipating any such two-tier system. I think schools wouldn't be capable of operating such a two-tier system anyway, but there's no sign that government is suggesting that. So I think that's not the issue. But what we need government to do is to help us with the public health messaging. And it's also clear from the chief medical officers that they don't think that vaccination is the silver bullet that will stop disruption of education. So we think the government should still be pressing on with getting out the CO2 monitors, checking ventilation in classrooms, maybe putting HEPA filtration in, those sorts of steps if we need to, going back to mask wearing as well. There are other steps that can be put in place to try and stop the virus spreading in schools.
Kevin Courtney, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us in the programme. Now, the African country of Gabon is asking the international community for money in return for protecting some of the world's most environmentally important rainforests. As oil becomes scarcer, timber has increasing value. Our climate correspondent, Hannah Thomas-Peter, reports now from Gabon.
We're in Gabon on the west coast of Central Africa at the invitation of its government. They are flying us deep into the jungle. The aim, to help us understand more about one of the most forested nations on the planet.
From above the canopy, you get a real sense of the sheer scale of this forest, stretching for hundreds of miles in every direction and covering nearly 90% of Gabon. It's part of the Congo Basin rainforest, which is such an important ecosystem. It's known as the lungs of Africa.
Gabon has been able to afford to leave this jungle alone because it's an oil-rich nation. But prices are plummeting, production dwindling, and so that's about to change.
You have to read the trees. This is the Akumi tree, which is the...
Lee White is the country's British-born environment minister.
60% of our economy is going to disappear in the next 20 years as oil revenues disappear. We have to replace those revenues with something else.
That something else is the forest. Gabon wants the international community to pay it for careful conservation or risk deforestation for logging and agriculture.
I think it would be very difficult to maintain forests long term without a real partnership between developed and developing countries, and without a business model, an economic model that makes rainforests valuable for the people that live in them.
Firstly, we are looking for a forest elephant. Here we have two species of elephants. We have a savanna and a forest elephant.
Degrading the forest would put one of the most biodiverse regions on the planet at risk. In Lope National Park, we see just some of the wildlife that lives here. A family of chimps crossing the savannah. And later, forest elephants. More than 50,000 of them live in Gabon, 60% of the world's population. But even here, climate change is having an impact. Warmer temperatures reducing fruit growth on trees, pushing the elephants into villages.
That is the big problem in Gabon. Every day there are in that plantation to eat the plants, like cassava, everything which the woman plant.
That night, evidence on our doorstep of the problem. A group of 12 foraging near our lodge. As climate change intensifies, so does the fragility and importance of this ecosystem. Gabon is one of the few countries on Earth that absorbs more carbon than it emits. It's why this whole region is crucial to the battle against climate change and why what happens here will matter far beyond national borders. This is the strength of Gabon's negotiating position at the COP26 UN Climate Summit later this year. Tongi Gahuma Bakali is the man making the argument for a new carbon market that rewards conservation.
Because of the need to become emergent countries, all tropical countries in the world lose their forest. It's a fact. Our forests still stand. The trees are still stand. So now, help us to not become like other tropical countries.
Gabon is at a crossroads, trying to make an environmental asset profitable without destroying it, a model for the future, but only if the rest of the world agrees. Hannah Thomas-Peter, Sky News in Gabon.
Did you know that air pollution isn't just bad for the environment, it's bad for our health too?
It will be a rather cloudy start with outbreaks of rain, especially in the south. Heavy and possibly thundery rain will move northwards over England with a mix of bright skies and showers elsewhere. It will be rather muggy in the south. The rain will eventually clear to the North Sea later. Taking a look at the daily air quality index, where levels of air pollution are bandied from 1 being low to 10 being very high, the cloudy and rather wet conditions will help keep air pollution levels low throughout today.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Now, a lawyer for Prince Andrew has appeared in a pre-trial hearing in New York to dismiss sexual assault claims against the Duke as baseless, unviable and potentially unlawful. Virginia Giuffre has launched a civil lawsuit accusing him of sexual assault. Joining us now, John Arledge, senior writer for the Sunday Times, who himself conducted a series of interviews with the Duke of York back in 2017. Really good to see you this morning, John. Obviously, both of us being mindful of the legal constraints around the reporting of cases such as this. I wonder what you make of the way in which the Prince's legal team appears to be trying to deal with this.
We're entering a new chapter. You may remember last time I was talking on this programme, we were discussing about how the court case in America could present some opportunities for the Duke. Well, you're seeing them try to take those opportunities now. You're seeing them get on the front foot. Andrew, if he's going to have any role in public life going forward, which is what he wants, is going to have to get rid of this case. He's going to have to make this case go away. And the way they're clearly going to try and do it is in two stages. One is they're going to try and delay it. We saw the arguments yesterday about whether the papers have been served properly on the Duke. That's a delaying tactic. You saw another more bold strand to the strategy, which is to try and strike the case out altogether. You'll have seen in court yesterday lawyers for the Duke arguing that a previous legal agreement between Virginia Giuffre and Jeffrey Epstein, who's accused of trafficking her to the Duke, means that she can't take legal action over any other cases in the future. So this case is baseless. So really, it's a new chapter. It's a two-pronged approach. One is delay. The other is try and strike out.
Of course, the Prince denies all of the allegations that are made against him. But in reputational terms, and of course, his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, brought some very difficult questions right to the door of Buckingham Palace. In reputational terms, can the Palace, can the Prince continue to try to deal with this situation almost at arm's length in the way in which they're doing?
Not really. No, they have to get involved. They are getting involved, actually. That's what you saw yesterday. They are trying to get involved. They're going to get into this thing and they're going to try and get rid of it. That's the only option that the Prince has and the only way back to any kind of role in public life. His brother, the future King, Charles, has made this abundantly clear with such serious allegations hanging over him, litigation, court cases. He can't have any public role. That means he, the Duke, knows he has to get rid of this case. He has to put it to one side, make it go away. And he's hired a much, much, much more proactive, aggressive legal team to try and do those two things I mentioned just now. One is push it away and delay, whilst creating an opportunity, making time to try and strike it out in other ways. The game here, if it is a game, is get rid of this court case.
Whilst the US legal system is often characterised as being able to protect the interests of those who have the money, who have the contacts that people like Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew have, at the same time, judges do tend there to push back against people trying to avoid any kind of judicial oversight.
Yes, I don't think anyone is going to get any special favours from the judge in this case, or anyone from the American side. I think they regard this as they rightly should do, an extremely serious matter, and it doesn't matter who the people involved in the case are. They will all be treated absolutely the same. This will be done by the book. The judge has made that absolutely clear. I suspect the argument over the serving of the papers, whether the Duke was served with the legal documents correctly, will be dealt with relatively swiftly. He will be served with the papers, and then there'll be another hearing next month when we see whether the Duke's lawyers are able to try and strike out the case as they hope. So no, I don't think anyone is going to get any special treatment here at all.
Well, certainly. There is plenty of running in both this case and indeed the reputational damage that has been done to the royal family. Just 10 seconds, if you can. Can the royal family make it back from this in terms of the PR disaster that it's been?
Yes, if the Duke strikes out this case. That's the key. If this case is hanging around, if that photograph is hanging around alongside the case of the Duke and Virginia Giuffre together, there's no way back for him. He's got to get this case off the table.
John Arledge, good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us again on the programme. Stay where you are. After the break, we'll be hearing from Labour on exactly what they're looking for in the government's upcoming winter plan announcement. That's next.